John Stuart Mill warned of the coming social tyranny that has taken root on social media. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. And today we're going to be talking about John Stuart Mill. He's a philosopher from the 1800s, and he wrote a great book called On Liberty. Highly recommend it. You can see it in the background here. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill. It's one of the most compelling defenses of free speech that's ever been written, frankly. And I think he had some real good observations about the tyranny of the majority and the dangers of that kind of mob rule that you can see. And it's not a new problem in societies. I think that the censorship, whether it's from the government or from other institutions, is a danger to liberty, and it's censorship. And I think you're starting to see that today on social media like Facebook, Twitter, and other venues where individuals are being silenced for having unpopular views. So let's, and Mill had a warning about this, and this was in 1859. He wrote On Liberty, and so I think that we should consider what he had to say. Let's just jump into it. Mill wrote, "When society is itself the tyrant, society collectively over the separate individuals who compose it, its means of tyrannizing are not restricted to the acts which it may do by the hands of political functionaries. Society can and does execute its own mandates, and if it issues wrong mandates instead of right, or any mandates at all in things with which it ought not to meddle, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself." Wow. So are we in danger today of creating such a social tyranny with the censorship we're starting to see on places like Facebook or Twitter? You have a situation, James Woods was just banned from Twitter. And he had written, if you try to kill the king, you better not miss. Hang them all. And this was in response to the outcome of the Mueller report. Where it was found that there was no coordination or conspiracy between President Donald Trump, his campaign, or any American, and Russia to interfere in the 2016 elections. It just wasn't there. And so what is James Woods doing here? He's warning against basically saying that the DOJ and these intelligence agencies, they had this concocted idea that President Donald Trump was a Russian agent, and they took their shot at the president and they missed. And there's going to be repercussions for those who are perpetrating the Russia collusion hoax. Now Woods is saying they're basically traitors. And that hang them all. I might go in a different direction. I think we need to reform the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the vast surveillance system that we have here in the United States. That is one of the reasons why the Russia collusion hoax was possible. For example, Christopher Steele in his dossier was using subsources, and the FISA court was fully aware of that secondhand and third-hand information. Steele didn't go to Russia to find out the information that he was using. He had a network of informants, I suppose, that were, and they may not have had access to it either. So the FISA court was using unverified information as eyewitness testimony to get a surveillance warrant against the Trump campaign, the opposition party, in an election year. That's horrible. We got to make sure that never happens again. And other people are going to have their ideas. They think that, this was treason. Now, whether or not it's treason is, that's an interesting question, I suppose. But that's a perfectly valid opinion. I think that James Woods, if you try to kill the king, you better not miss, hang them all. That's pretty tame in comparison to some of the stuff you see on Twitter nowadays. He's explicit about the capital crime of treason, that it would be subject to execution. And surely that is, if you're calling somebody a traitor to the United States, well, under the U.S. Code, that's a capital crime. Whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war and adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death. So if you call someone a traitor, you're basically calling that for them to be executed. And this is not uncommon on Twitter. If you go to the Trump treason hashtag, you can just get all the latest examples of people who think that President Donald Trump is a traitor, and I suppose they believe he should be executed too. And some of them are explicit and some of them are not. If you go to the treason hashtag, you can also see folks on both sides of the political spectrum who think that their political opponents are traitors and presumably should be executed. Again, if you are a traitor under U.S. law, you shall suffer death. That's what the law says. So now, whether or not the people who waged the Russia collusion hoax are traitors, that's kind of subjective. I don't think that one way or another we're really going to mete it out on Twitter. So you probably could have just, and this is not even all that specific. It says hang them all. I mean, who is that? Who is that even referring to? I guess we think it's the investigators. Woods actually issued a statement to the Daily Wire. He said Twitter demanded that I rescind my tweet, paraphrasing Emerson. Woods said in the statement, "It is now seems they have chosen to delete that tweet from my account without my permission. Until free speech is allowed on Twitter, I will not be permitted to participate in our democracy." Okay, so what he's referring to is Ralph Waldo Emerson's famous reply to Oliver Wendell Holmes's criticism of Plato in 1875. Where Emerson warned against crossing giants. When you strike at a king, you must kill him. And this is basically a warning, not to, if you're going to take on someone like the president, I guess, in Woods's case, you have to make it stick. If you're going to criticize Plato, make it stick. And the Mueller report tells us that the investigation into President Trump was basically not worthwhile. There was no coordination or conspiracy between members of the Trump campaign, Trump himself, or any American, and Russia. So it was an investigation into nothing, and it was based upon false allegations that were paid for by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. Now, is that treason? It is what it is. It was a bad investigation. And so I think what we've seen is that critics of the president have consistently called President Trump a traitor and throughout this whole ordeal. But if you take the contrary view that, in fact, the people who ran the investigation are traitors, then I guess that's a suspendable, a bannable offense. And so I think that whether we agree or disagree about whether that was treason by the Justice Department intelligence agencies, I don't think it was really a bannable offense. It's censorship. That's what they're doing to James Woods. He's a prominent conservative on Twitter now, and he had over 2 million followers. And suddenly they can do you make the wrong, you utter the wrong words on Twitter. Apparently, you can lose access to your fans, your livelihood, your business, and so you can be blacklisted. And I don't think that we should be doing that in our society, really. I think we can afford to have debate and civil discourse, or even some uncivil discourse. I mean, they're not banning the Trump treason hashtag on Twitter. They're not banning the treason hashtag on Twitter. And so I think that, you could just look it up every day and you'll find out the latest person who thinks that somebody committed treason and should be executed. And if we're not going to consistently go ahead and do that, I think that maybe we don't need censorship on our social media. We can have a discussion. I mean, they're not bound by the First Amendment. Twitter's not. Facebook isn't. And it's just not isolated. There are people who are getting banned on these social media platforms, and some of them, are either conservative or on the right side of the political spectrum. And I imagine there are some liberals and or left wingers who get banned from time to time. And so, but why would this be bad? Well, a Pew report came out that shows you that just how many people are on Facebook and Twitter and other. So 68% of adults in America are on Facebook, and about 24% are on Twitter. So that's 170 million people use social media on Facebook. 61 million are on Twitter. Those are very dominant market positions. People have come to depend upon the social media world to get their voices out there. Whether you're an individual, a pundit, a politician, an organization like Americans for Limited Government, we all use social media. And so if you get banned and you're silenced and you're censored, it's going to be more difficult to get the word out. There's no question what the implication of being banned off these platforms are. I mean, what if GoDaddy started saying, dailytorch.com, that's nice website, but we're shutting you down. It doesn't matter if you pay us for hosting. We're just going to shut you down. That'd be terrible. I mean, you're going to start having servers deplatforming websites. What if ICANN, the Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, just starts preventing DNS linking between the IP address and a domain name, and just starts banning domain names that they don't like, as in an effort to control discourse? I don't think that would be good. I think that would be really bad. I think that we don't want to have a social tyranny like John Stuart Mill was describing in 1859. I don't think we'll be better as a country or society as a result of that. And so, but now there's a way to fight back. You have tech bias. Whitehouse.gov /tech bias is a means of the Americans to report to the White House if they're being banned on social media. Maybe you want to check that out. Have you been banned on social media? You want to let somebody know about it? No matter your views, if you suspect political bias caused such an action to be taken against you, share your story with President Trump. President Trump is looking at this and thinks that social media platforms should advance freedom of speech, and I think they, in a large degree, they do. This is the formulation of the marketplace of ideas. That is a huge part of American philosophy and discourse. This is a Duke University study that talks about the marketplace of idea. And we're going to read a little bit of it here. Classic marketplace theory assumes that truth is discovered through competition with falsehood, and stresses that any authoritatively imposed truth is plagued with the danger of error. John Stuart Mill thus argued that repression may interfere with the market's ability to seek truth. First, if the censored opinion contains truth, its silencing will lessen the chance of our discovering that truth. Secondly, if conflicting opinions each contain part of the truth, the clash between them is the only method of discovering the contribution of each toward the whole of the truth. Finally, even if the censored view is wholly false and the upheld opinion wholly true, challenging the accepted opinion must be allowed if people are to hold that accepted view as something that other than a dogma or prejudice. If they do not, its meaning will be lost or enfeebled. Mill accordingly believed that those who considered clashes among competing views unnecessary wrongly presumed the infallibility of their own opinions. So we can have a debate about whether or not the people who perpetrated the Russia collusion hoax are traitors. I think our society can have that discussion. It's not going to be the end of the world. I don't think that it poses a imminent danger to anybody. And so Mill wrote that in order to defend the marketplace of ideas, Mill wrote that protection against the tyranny of the magistrate is not enough. There needs to be protection against the tyranny of prevailing opinion and feeling, against the tendency of society to impose by other means than civil penalties its own ideas and practices as rules of conduct on those who dissent from them, to fetter the development and, if possible, prevent the formation of any individuality not in harmony with its ways. and compel all characters to fashion themselves upon the model of its own. He continued, there is a limit to the legitimate interference of collective opinion with individual independence, and to find that limit and maintain against its encroachment, it is indispensable to a good condition of human affairs. Again, it is indispensable to find that limit to the good condition of human affairs as a protection against political despotism. And he called it the principal question of all human affairs. It's very eloquent. This is one of his best essays. This is his magnum opus. And he says that the sole end for which mankind are warranted, individually or collectively, in interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So we look at things like the terms of service by Twitter. They certainly forbid imminent threats of violence. Again, this is Twitter's policies here against violence and abusive behavior. You may not make specific threats or violence or wish for the serious physical harm, death, or disease of an individual or group of people. Okay, so did James Woods do that? Is this a hang them all? Is that it's certainly calling for the execution, is supporting the death penalty, a violation of Twitter or social media, other companies, their rules too? Well, maybe it is, but I don't think it's not very specific. The rules are pretty clear. It has to be a specific threat of violence or wish to serious physical harm of an individual or group of people. Hang them all. It's not specific. It just isn't. It doesn't tell you who should be tried for treason, again, which is a capital crime. But I mean, this is where we are. We're policing whether or not you can call someone a traitor. But clearly, Twitter does not prevent people from calling President Trump a traitor. Which, if he was a traitor, he could be subject to death. If he were tried and convicted. And so I think that you have a situation where the rules are, maybe they go a little too far. And there's other violence that is allowed on Twitter. There's no question. I mean, here's the Antifa International page. Your granddad didn't play for fascists. He shot them. And then, I mean, that's a pretty violent slogan there. I mean, maybe we can disagree with the call to violence here, but Antifa is this is a CNN report about Antifa, and they're pretty violent. While Antifa members don't fit into a single category, they say many are millennials, and many live on society's fringes, undocumented immigrants, transgenders, low-wage workers who don't conform to the traditional 9-to-5, and their methods are often violent. Antifa leaders admit they're willing to physically attack anyone who employs violence against them or who condones racism, as long as force is used in the name of eradicating hatred. So they're saying, we're the good guys. We use only violence against bad people. Well, they're still advocating violence. And one of the Twitter policies is that you cannot affiliate with organizations who use or promote violence against citizens to further their causes. Well, they're calling for violence. They want to shoot the fascists, I guess. I mean, we have a civil society. We don't actually shoot even people who are fascists or communists or Ku Klux Klan or anybody else. I mean, you can be an extremist in this and in America, and you'll have a right to free speech. You're allowed to march. I mean, Supreme Court and federal courts have consistently ruled on this sort of thing. And so as long as you're not creating an imminent threat of violence and inciting violence, then you're not going to be subject to civil penalty. And that's been it's been that way since 1969. Brandenburg v. Ohio basically says that the use of law cannot be to basically stop speech from occurring. Cannot be done unless such advocacy is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. or incite violence. And so I think that, going to did James Woods, did his tweet create an imminent threat of violence? I don't think so. And maybe that would be a better standard. You can have a heated political discussion on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else, and people are going to call people traitors. It's pretty much ingrained into our national political discourse. Anywhere there's politics, this is going to be going on. There's going to be factions. There are going to be people who believe that their political opponents are traitors and should be suffer death. It's just a part of the and that's a part of liberty, frankly. The fact that you have this debate. It's all about factions. And, we knew this. The country knew it. The framers of the Constitution knew it. James Madison in Federalist 10 wrote that there were two methods to removing the causes of faction. The one, by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. Again, faction is it does not come about but because of liberty. And so the other, to remove faction, would be to give every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. It would never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it is worse than disease. If you remove liberty, if you're going to start censoring people, that's worse than the fact that there was factions or people with different opinions. Faction is to air what air liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. Madison continued. The second expedient is as impractical as the first would be unwise. As long as and again, the second expedient was to give everyone the same opinion. As long as the reason of a man continues fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves. The diversity in the faculties of men, for which the rights of property originate, is not less insuperable obstacle to a uniformity of interests. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. So the reason we have a constitution is to protect people's right to have their own opinion, their right to liberty, to freedom of speech. That's why we have it. And so with that, we need to protect that, whether it's from government. Again, Mill was saying that we need to have discussion, and that it's not merely government that can commit censorship. It can happen with private institutions as well, and that's a danger to liberty as well. Again, it's not limited to the political functionaries. Society can exercise its own methods and engage in social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression. And so you can have pushes for one-party rule, or social tyranny, and maybe that's what we're seeing on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere right now. Maybe it's a danger to liberty, and we need to consider it. If you look, at the Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, he was endorsing in 2018 a piece that called for one-party rule. It calls for Democrat one-party rule to basically to heal. It says why there's no bipartisan way at this juncture in our history. One side must win, and so wow, that's pretty. One-party rule. I mean, that doesn't really allow for dissent. You're not allowed to disagree with the one-party rule. So the final battle begins in 2018. This was before the midterms. America is desperate for a functioning political supermajority that can break out of our political stasis and boldly move ahead and take on our many 21st century challenges. The nation cannot take much more of our one step forward, one step back politics that gets little done despite the need for massive changes. And then the authors say that America has many parallels to the 1850s or the 1930s. And after the Civil War, the Republicans won. After the 30s, the Democrats won. And so America today is in a similar position. Our technologies, our economy, our geopolitics are going through fundamental changes. We are facing new challenges like climate change and massive economic inequality that must be addressed with fundamental reforms. America cannot afford more political paralysis. One side or the other must win. This is a civil war. This is a peace that and it cannot, and they say it can be won without firing a shot, but it's a fundamental conflict between two worldviews that must be resolved in short order. California, as usual, resolved it early. The Democrats won, the Republicans lost. The conservative way forward lost. The progressive way forward began. As we've laid out in the series, California is in the future. They're always ahead of the future. They're ahead of their times, California. So they're one-party rule. That's the solution for our nation's ills. And Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter, says that's a great read. So, maybe they support one-party rule over there at Twitter. They want to have social tyranny, I suppose. And I don't think that's good for this country. I think that we could have a discussion. We can. That's what Mill said. We need debate. Debate is the answer here. I think that we can have a discussion about what's going on in our society without a need for one-party rule. That's not. Republic. Just for my piece here, republics at their core are fragile things. To survive, the freedom from political violence must be maintained. It's not something I personally endorse, and that's true. I've written about this before. Political violence is always wrong, no matter which party it comes from. So I don't think we should be attacking our political opponents violently. I don't think we should be prosecuting our political opponents. That's what banana republics do. And I don't think the power of law should be used for political ends to go after political opponents. I acknowledge that such factionalism is an implication of free speech, and I'd rather have a free speech with factions, even with the calls for political prosecutions, as you saw with the James Woods tweet there. Or accusations of treason, than a regime of censorship that seeks to police it. And I think that's the danger we're seeing today, is that we could have censorship on social media, and they can silence your voice, they can shut off your social media accounts, even if you have hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. It won't stop there. They could be shutting down websites and preventing political parties from communicating altogether. There could be a push for one-party rule. I don't think that's really where we should go as a nation. I think that one-party rule is dangerous. One of the reasons President Trump won in 2016 was because people feared one-party rule. At the time, 67% of federal judges would have been Democrat by the end of Hillary Clinton's first term. And this goes to how many sitting judges there were and the numbers that were appointed by Democrats and Republicans. In 2016, it was 54% to 46% in favor of Democrats. So if we had done another 4 to 8 years, you could have seen anywhere from 67% of federal judges being appointed by Democrats. If Hillary Clinton had won after 2 terms, and then 79% of all federal judges would have been Democrats or appointed by Democrats. And so I think the dangers of one-party rule, one side getting too much power, is I think that's something we need to consider. One-party rule, this is dangerous. I don't want to see a country. America has always thrived with, I think, the two-party system, particularly in modern times. And, both sides get to have their opportunities to govern. And that's through competition, we're going to have better policies. We're going to get to a more, hopefully, sometimes parties can pursue bad policies, but that's why we have debate. That's why we need liberty. That's why we need to, have discussions. John Stuart Mill was no fool. He's one of the greatest philosophers ever. On Liberty, 1859. You should read it. This is and Facebook and Twitter. If you're unfamiliar with the work of John Stuart Mill, you should read it. This should be your doctrine. Free speech, the marketplace of ideas. We can have these debates. We can talk about the. You don't have to hide the James Woods tweet. There it is. You're not hiding it. If someone else posted it on Twitter, we can talk about the James Woods tweet and say, were the people who pursued the Russia collusion hoax, were they traitors or were they wrong? Was it malicious? Were they lying? Well, we can have a discussion about that. We can look at the facts and we can come to our own decisions about how this happened and what can be done about it. I think we need FISA reform. I think we need to make it so that you can't have hearsay being submitted to the FISA court to spy on U.S. citizens and U.S. presidential campaigns, spying on the opposition party in an election year by a sitting administration. It's horrible. This can't be happening. So I think we can have these discussions. We need to have a reform of surveillance in this country. I think that talking about it, even if it's in a provocative way, that can be useful to the discussion. That can get people's attention. That's what James Woods is doing here. He's getting people's attention and saying that you shouldn't be spying on presidential campaigns, and maybe it's treason. But I don't personally agree with that. But that's his opinion. He's entitled to it. You don't need that Twitter. You don't need to hide the tweet from me, and you're not doing so anyways. You're not banning the Trump treason hashtag. You're not banning the treason hashtag, even though by calling someone a traitor, you're saying that they're that they're guilty and under U.S. law and should suffer death. I don't think we should be doing that in politics. I think calls for political violence are wrong. I think that, but we don't need to police every instance of it. And again, we can have a discussion. We don't need a tyranny of the majority. And I'll leave you with the quote from Mill because it's so good. I mean, what a great philosopher. The world is so much better for having John Stuart Mill. And so I say, let's try free speech. Debate is the solution. As Mill wrote, quote, if all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. And so that's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Please hit that subscribe button and have a good day.